Okay, this first question is from Chris, and he says, I'm looking for more specifics on how to practice. My issue is that if I'm practicing with known answers, how can I know that my mind is not just adjusting? And if I am testing things I don't know that answer to, I of course don't know if the answer is correct. I've also been having difficulty practicing muscle testing on my wife. Again, my mind is getting in the way, and I don't trust the responses, and her arm gets tired very quickly. She's obviously resisting too much. I have purchased both programs and really want to move forward, but I'm having great difficulty with the muscle testing aspect. Okay, that's a great question, and this kind of thing comes up quite a bit. So if you go to healerslibrary.com, you can look at all of the different webinars that we have. There was a webinar that we did about muscle testing, okay, where we go over a lot of this and explain how it works. And what I would recommend, if you're having any difficulties doing muscle testing, that webinar will help you to overcome a lot of those things. But in the meantime, let me just give you some pointers about that. Muscle testing is the key tool to being able to use this work. But I want to point out something that I mentioned in the Emotion Code book, and that is that Emotion Code, or the muscle testing, is like training wheels for your intuition. And what do I mean by that? Well, most of you that have been doing this for a little while have noticed something strange, and that is that a split second before you get the answer on muscle testing, you will know what the answer is. That answer will flow into your mind, and then a second or two later you'll get the answer on the muscle testing, and you'll say, yeah, you know, that's interesting because I knew that was going to be the answer. That is your intuition, okay? That's that little voice inside of you that will speak to you. Now, if you listen to that voice and you tune into that voice, as time goes on, you'll get to a point where you'll wonder if you really even need muscle testing. And I still use muscle testing myself, of course, but there were days when I was in practice where if I was feeling particularly strong and healthy, sometimes I'd go for a whole day and not use any muscle testing at all. I would just allow myself to just use the intuition that was flowing. And so that's where you want to get to. That's a beautiful place to be. But in the meantime, let me share some other things with you. The most common mistake that people make with muscle testing is that they use too much force. And in the webinar, we talk about this. And when I was first learning to self-test, and by the way, it's wonderful to be able to test other people and have them hold out their arm and so on. It's great to be able to demonstrate on them so that they can feel the change taking place. It builds their faith in what you're doing. But if I had to choose, if I could only choose one form of muscle testing to keep and I had to get rid of one, hands down, I would choose self-testing. Because self-testing enables you to test other people, to test yourself. And the reality is that most of the people who are doing this work most of the time are actually doing self-testing. Most of the people, of course, if you're working on someone long distance, you don't have the option of working on them or muscle testing them live and so on. So there are some keys to self-testing, and one of those keys is to remember that what you're trying to do is sense the change that is taking place in your body. If you're testing someone else, for example, and they make a true statement, there's a change that occurs in their body, and their arm will be strong. If they make a false statement, for example, or say something that's incongruent, there's a change that takes place in their body, and that change will manifest in their arm, for example, being weaker. Well, there is a subtle change taking place in your body as well. When I was working with people back in practice, what I found was that if I asked a question of a person, at the same time that I would get a muscle response from them, I found that if I tested myself, I would manifest that same response in my body. If they were weak, I would be weak on muscle testing. If they were strong, I would be strong. And so that's kind of where this came about. So remember that what you're trying to do is you're trying to sense that subtle change that is taking place in the body. You can't see that change visibly, but there is this subtle change. Now, I thought that I had to use force to detect this change. I didn't realize that it was a subtle change. I thought I needed a lot of force to do it. And so doing the self-testing, I remember for about 7 years, my fingers hurt all the time. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to help you to avoid that. And we talk more about this in the webinar, but basically what you want to do is use the absolute minimum amount of force necessary to sense to actually get that answer. In fact, now I've evolved to a point where I don't really use any force at all. And that's where you want to get to as fast as you can. Now, it does take a little bit of trust and faith, and I recommend always that you pray. Remember that the highest duty of the healer is to act as a go-between for God and for that higher power, whatever you believe that higher power to be. So pray and ask that higher power to help you, and focus love on whoever it is you're working on. If you're working on yourself, focus love on yourself. If you're working on someone else, focus all the love that you can on that person. Sometimes we get so stuck in the mechanics of this that we forget that how this really works is by us getting to a higher vibrational level, really, and then it just works. Now, in a way, it's like typing. If you've ever learned how to touch type, for example, if you think about what you're doing when you're typing, suddenly your speed drops to a fraction of what it was, and you start making all kinds of mistakes. If you just allow it to go and allow it to flow, then it works. Now, it's also important when you're doing the muscle testing, okay, even if you're just learning, it's important to have faith in the process. Now, faith I describe and define as believing that you can do this, and also at the same time being grateful to God, having gratitude in your heart to God that this works, okay? And so those are the best answers I can give you about that. I would highly recommend that you go and watch that muscle testing webinar. I think that you'll really enjoy that, and it'll give you a lot more answers